Do you ever wonder what's on your therapist's mind? This is a chance for us to sit down with my wife, your therapist, peel back the curtain a little bit, and get to take a look at what's on her mind at the end of her day. My name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hi, I'm Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not a replacement for therapy. It's not the same thing as therapy.
But again, I want this to be kind of supplemental to therapy, especially this episode.
Yes.
Because today we're going to be talking about, in my opinion, one of the best ways that you can get the most out of your therapy experience.
Yeah.
Which is by blatantly and boldly lying to your therapist at every chance.
Yes, boldly lie to your therapist. That's the best advice.
I'm definitely going to title this episode, You Should Lie to Your Therapist.
Perfect.
Because that is basically what we're talking about here, is really, all jokes aside, the importance of being truthful with your therapist when you're in a session.
Yes, and that makes me think that we're not really talking about lying versus telling the truth so much as being honest and vulnerable. That I don't really find that clients are lying in session, and even if a client were to lie in session outright, that's okay. There's something there that's like important to them. There's a reason that they're saying the thing that they're saying, and that information is still valuable. But really the only way that growth gets to happen in therapy, really the only way that we're getting to see the benefits of going to therapy and paying all the money that we pay to go to therapy and all the things that come along with it, taking the time out of our day and digging into stuff that's uncomfortable, is when we're actually able to be honest and vulnerable. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. So that's what we're talking about today.
I think that it's a big challenge to go from not having a space where we're able to talk through our issues like without judgment.
Yeah.
And then to immediately plunge headfirst into an environment where that's exactly what you're supposed to do. And,
right.
And that's a very scary thing to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people come to therapy not knowing a whole lot about therapy in general, that they might technically know that it's a space where you get to be honest, but like you said, when everything else in your life has been one way, you're not going to come into this room or hop onto the computer and magically feel like, oh, I can just say everything without fear of judgment. That makes perfect sense. Like, no, it's weird, it's uncomfortable. That's okay.
You know, the thing that's definitely on my mind right now as we're sitting here talking about this is kind of the way that our friendship started.
Our friendship, the one between you and me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing that a lot of people don't know is that we were friends for a very long time before we started dating.
Yep.
And we were friends in high school, and we lived in different states, and it's a long story that is not very interesting of how that friendship came about.
Yeah.
But you were somebody that I could talk to without judgment because you did not know or you weren't particularly close to any of my friends or my family, so that I could speak with you, not as my therapist, but as a friend about the things that were going on in my life. And you were able to do the same with me. And that was a very special relationship for me as friends.
Right.
Which is why I think that we have such a strong marriage, because our relationship was founded on a friendship first.
No, it was the weird creation of this space where, because we weren't at all in each other's lives in another way, we were just honest with one another. But it was this weird, distinguished space that was different from everything else in our lives. And that made it so special. And I do think that really contributed to the rest of our relationship, the way that dating and marriage has gone, because we were able to be honest and vulnerable in a way that I don't think a lot of people ever feel like they get to be with somebody else. I think it's so common to go through life and never encounter a space like that.
Especially when you articulate like how you feel about things, like truly, there's usually some sort of consequence to that. even if it's not exactly a negative one, there's like a reaction to it when you tell your friends how you feel about them or how you feel about yourself. because they know other people who know you and you're in this whole little world. But like when you walk into a therapy session, you are immersing yourself in this little protected bubble.
Yep.
Where you get to just say whatever is on your mind, and that stays in that room.
Yeah, that there are so many boundaries in place that allow that space to occur, that I very intentionally don't know anybody else in your life. If so, I'd be telling you from the first session, hey, I think we, are friends with the same person. Like, this isn't going to work out. I can't be.
Oh, that's a non-negotiable. Like, if I know anybody in your life, I can't really be your therapist.
So there certainly could be a circumstance, and I know that there are allowances for, like, you live in a rural area and everybody kind of knows some of the same people. But in general, if we have any significant overlap in our relationships, we cannot be in a counseling relationship together.
That's how important.
It's so important.
Wow.
Yeah, because then you really don't feel like you have the space to say what you need to say. You know that it'll affect so-and-so and that I'll have feelings and thoughts about it. And instead, you exist as this isolated person to me in the same way in reverse. And so there's no overlap of those things.
Why is that, do you think? Like, why is it so important, that sense of privacy?
Well, as counselors, we're taught about something called bracketing, which is essentially placing brackets around the things that are the things that we care about, the things that we bring into the room. So when you mention something that touches on something in my life, I'm taught about putting brackets around that thing, and now I'm going to deal with that outside of the room. That's not going to impact our session. So we have a lot of training around how to do that and how to navigate having that balancing act of really making sure that those things aren't impacting the session. But in general, because we're humans, we're going to have an overlap in our life. And a lot of times that can be really beneficial. But yeah, it's really important that we set the groundwork that we're not going to intentionally put any of that into the relationship from the start. And if you and I share a friend and you're having an issue with that friend, that's going to be tricky. I'm going to have thoughts and feelings around that I'm not going to be able to separate out.
So what? Oh, go ahead.
Or you'll know that relationship exists and you won't say what's really on your mind because you're not trying to. That's how we are in social relationships, as we're trying to dance around all of these different intricate relationships that we have. And you don't have to do that in counseling because those relationships don't exist. And also I have the training and knowledge and boundaries around how to protect against that.
So what's a good example of a bracket that you've had to put on?
That's a good question. I think, just something that could come up in general is that I've had a similar experience to the one that you've had. So let's say you're considering about how you're going to move forward in the relationship with a parent based on something that they've done. And I've had a parent do a similar thing. It's my job to put brackets around that. This is not my relationship with my parent.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that you're a child and that is your parent. It is not the same thing. And so I'm going to bracket that situation in my brain and go, this is not the same situation. I'm talking to a completely different person about a completely different situation. That's how unique all of our experiences are. But it brought up something for me. I remembered that I encountered that with a parent. Well, now I need to go take that into the rest of my life and deal with that elsewhere. The other way that can come up is, let's say it's something as simple as you're talking about like a political belief. My political beliefs aren't relevant. That's not important in the session. So I'm going to bracket the things that, I think about as a voter. That's not relevant right now. We're talking about you and how this thing has impacted your life and played an important role. Now I'm going to take that stuff and I can do with it what I need to outside of the session.
If I was the therapist and your dad said something very similar to something that my dad had said, I would be like, that motherfucker. That motherfucker, you need to fucking deal with that shit, homie. Like, I would impose my own, ideas on that.
Let me tell you exactly what to do in this situation.
Oh, bro, listen, been there, done that, dog. Let me talk you through this.
And there are different theories of thought on this, which is that sometimes there's absolutely no sharing back and forth from the therapist. And I think that can make counseling feel extremely clinical, that there's this very firm wall and divide there. I actually think that it can be helpful. I had a client who's saying, hey, I'm dealing with, alcohol addiction has really impacted my life because of this family member dealing with it. And I can be like, I actually know what it's like to be in that spot. Mm-hmm. Like, this is the way that hurt me. And that level of empathy, even though I can express empathy without that, can feel really different. And can hit in a different way. Now, the difference is, unlike a friendship where we have a mutual sharing back and forth, I'm done. I'm now done sharing. That was enough information so that you really know that I've been in a similar experience.
Right.
But that's no longer relevant. Again, all of our experiences are very unique. Just because I've had a family member dealing with alcohol addiction doesn't mean it's like your family. We're done. And that's now bracketed.
Right.
But maybe that's helped us to make a connection and move a little bit forward in building rapport.
My therapist is so bracketed.
I love that about her. It's so funny.
4 years of therapy. I don't know anything about this woman. I'm not even sure I know her name. I plop down from my session. I'm like, all right, for the next hour, I'm going for it. This is going to get messy. You're going to need to take an aspirin. I got some news to share about me.
That makes for such a delight of a client. And we're going to get into this a little bit today as we're talking about it. I love a client who has decided not to worry about me during the session. Because that ends up having to be such an untangling of those sorts of feelings. Like, I end up having to do so much work, not around the thing we're actually trying to talk about, but around why you can't get into it, because that's hard.
Yeah.
And again, I think we're literally just about to get into this, but it is a gift as a therapist when a client walks in the room and is like, okay, fuck, here it is. Here's the whole thing. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't care what your personal experiences have been on this issue. Here is what happened to me, and let's get into it. That's amazing. That's
My therapy didn't start that way, for sure. Mm-hmm. It's because every relationship you ever have had in the history of your entire life, you have had to worry about that person and the impact of your words and your actions on that person. Yes. Right? Yeah. That if I share this story about my life with you, it will change the nature of our relationship in some, some clear way, right? And so, yeah, those early days with my therapist was definitely like me trying to feel that out because I wasn't familiar with the nature of that relationship. So, like, how far can I go to share how fucked up I am? And how will that impact the nature of our relationship? Man, I could go in there and tell her I had drowned a dog.
Like, okay, well, what led up to that? Yeah, what was that experience like for you? Yeah.
Yeah, she that's not really a great example. I wouldn't tell her I was like committing crimes, but you know what I mean? Like, she's just on my side.
Yeah.
And it's just great to have somebody who's just unapologetically like on your side of the story.
Yeah.
And just there to help you sort through it. And I'm so interested in talking to you about this specifically today because you've had some really great insights on this. Talk to me about what you see from clients a lot who feel like they're struggling to be honest.
Yeah.
What leads to that? Why is that? And how can you tell if somebody's struggling there?
So I think that there are a lot of different things that lead to this, and I'll give some specific examples. But something else that I see that's really of things clients say, where I know that they're dealing with this. I'm sorry, I'm like 8 thoughts into this.
You're not going to name clients and say this is...
Oh,
I'm joking.
No, I mean, I'm going to name some specific things that clients say. But what just appears on the surface when we're not talking about it at all is often that our sessions just stay really surface level. What happened this past week, and it's all in past tense. It all happened and it's over and we're moving on and on to the next thing. And the way that you feel about it is fine, or that was difficult, but it's very cerebral in the way that we're talking about that.
Right.
Yeah. It's very much like, here's the headline for what happened, but we're not really digging into it. And the conversations can really jump around a lot because there's not a lot of space to get into the thing that we're talking about.
It feels like you've been assigned to go clean a house and the house is messy. You know it's messy. That's your job, is house cleaning or whatever. but the door's locked and nobody can get in.
Yeah.
And nobody can let you in. And so
yeah, the client like comes outside and shuts the door behind them and they're like, oh my gosh, thanks so much for coming. So glad you're here. Have a seat. Let me know if I can get you some water and you can leave in an hour. Don't mind me.
yeah, like I'm here you're there to get into it. You're there to clean it out, you know?
Like I'm here because I love a messy house. Let's go. I know exactly what to do with it. That it might feel overwhelming to you, but it is not overwhelming to me. That I'm in that space for exactly that. That's what I'm anticipating. I'm not worried about things getting messy. I'm not like, oh God, I hope they don't say too much today. In fact, it can be really difficult. It's understandable, but it can be really difficult to sit in the room with somebody who only ever gives you the headline for the whole story of what happened. Because I know that there's more there. And I honestly know what it feels like to be on the other side of that. And how it's like, God, I just don't want to bother you. So here are some things that I hear from clients when they're kind of telling me out loud that they're not going to share the full story.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'm going to be easy. Don't worry, I'm going to be an easy client.
Yeah, it's going to be a smooth sailing with me, my guy. Like, we're going to have a great time together every week.
Don't you worry, it's going to be so easy. They're not saying nothing ever happens. They're just like, don't worry, I'm not going to be a burden to you. Or if they do say something, they'll be like, I know that's so embarrassing. I know that's so stupid. I know that was silly. That wasn't a big deal. They're like trying to assure me that, don't even worry about it. In fact, I said it, but let's move on. Let's not even talk about it.
Do you think that, because you're capturing that they're articulating something about you, they don't want to bother you. Mm-hmm. Could that be kind of a thinly veiled excuse? It's like, I am not really ready to open my emotions up and really be vulnerable here.
It can definitely be, I'm not feeling ready to open up and be vulnerable. A lot of times what's happening though is that in counseling, because counseling is a relationship, we're repeating what's happened in other relationships. And so often a client who is worried about not being a burden to me, worried about not freaking me out or being too much or being a difficult client, is that they were told in some way growing up, either directly or indirectly, that their feelings were too much, that they didn't have room in their house to be upset about things. They didn't have room in their house to cause an issue or be a problem, that they were probably the problem solver in their home, or maybe they listened to everybody else's problems, or they were the one who tried to keep the peace, or that when they did have feelings, their parent couldn't handle it, that their parent was shut down in some way, or explosive, or dismissive, but something happened that taught them it's a problem for me to be a human and to have feelings. Something else that's important to know is that we can't shut down just one emotion. So if you have completely plugged up all of your ability to be really angry or really sad or really frustrated or really disappointed, any of like the quote unquote negative emotions in life, what is simultaneously happening is that you have plugged up your ability to feel the other side of the spectrum of emotions.
But what if I'm just a cool guy? What if I'm just like super relaxed all the time? Nothing bothers me. Cool as a cucumber, baby.
You're probably just the most chill human on the planet. And honestly, why are you even here? What's going on?
I was so freaked out by that answer. Like, I'm in the session and I have to like come up with something. I am not a cool guy. Oh my God. Why did I say that?
The fact of the matter is that you're here for a reason, and that the best parts of being a human are the fact that we get to have this wide range of emotion. And sure, we feel this wide range of like grief and anger, but that those things mean something and they're an important part of us. And that stopping those emotions from coming to the surface stops every other delight of human existence from coming to the surface. Also, because those things are so intertwined. We have grief because we have love and because we care about things. We feel afraid because we care about things, because we care about the people in our life and we care about the things in our life, and that those are good. And it's not just that like you plug up emotions because you have to do that all at once. It's because they're all intertwined in a lot of ways. They're not, the emotions don't happen in isolation. So again, when people come in and wanting to be cool and chill, they probably have had to play that role their whole life. I'm just never an issue. I'm never a burden, and things happen and I'm chill. I'm cool and I'm fine, and like nobody has to worry about me. Don't even ask.
That just sounds like a really depressed person hyping themselves up before like a Tinder date.
Right.
Like, I'm fine. I'm not going to
cool.
unload.
I will not cry on this Tinder date. It's going to be cool. Chill. Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of times when you've had to be that your whole life, it's honestly an amazing thing that they're able to say out loud, don't worry, because they probably aren't even aware of what's going on. Like, what a great helpful verbal cue for me to know what's happening, but they're probably not even aware of the way that they've had to do that in some way their whole life. But yeah, it's the patterns that we learn. So again, why I think it's about honesty and vulnerability and not about lying, because that's not what they're setting out to do. I think that when they tell me, don't worry, I'm going to be easy, they believe that. I think they really think, like, don't worry, I'm going to be easy. And then the thoughts that go along with that is, I'm valuable because I'm easy. I'm valuable in this world because I don't take up any space. I never bother anybody. Nobody else ever hears about my emotions. And I don't even feel my emotions. I'm cool. I'm chill. Cool as a cucumber.
But meanwhile, those emotions are there, right?
Yeah.
So what are you seeing from clients who are trying to be relaxed, more than anything? How do you know? And I guess what I'm really asking is, what is the impact of kind of setting your emotions aside? Because we all know that you are experiencing them.
Yeah.
But you may just be like taught over the course of your life that you can't really show them.
Yep. The light side of that is that clients are probably pretty like tightly wound, that sort of, they can be that sort of like type A characteristic, or also just like really chill. Like, nothing bothers me. I'm never flustered, but there's this sense of having to disconnect or be hyper connected. So either they are so fully grasping onto life and keeping things in control all of the time and having to keep everything in the forefront of their mind because nothing can slip through the cracks. And that's exhausting. So they're tired out. They're irritated as hell, but they're not allowed to say that they're angry most of the time. And they're constantly feeling behind. And they're always feeling afraid that things are just about to slip out of control. That if they make one wrong move, if they miss one thing, if they let one thing slip, that might unravel the whole deal. Or there's this detachment. There's this, nothing ever bothers me, it's totally fine. But there's a lack of being able to engage in any part of their life. Because if I were to look at anything, then I'd have to care about it. So I hold everybody out at arm's distance, and when things happen, it's just like not even a big deal to me. I don't even think about it, but I'm not allowed to think about anything at all. So like frustrated all the time.
So what you're saying is, to the listeners, if you're feeling like everything's great, you need therapy. And if you're feeling like things could be better, you need therapy. And if you feel like everything's falling apart, guess what?
This episode could probably be titled, You Need Therapy. But yeah, absolutely. That all of those things, if you feel any of those things, if you have that intense attachment or detachment from your life, that those things are an indicator that like something else is going on. So that's the light side. The heavy side of that is that,
oh, it's not like light versus dark like Star Wars. I thought you were going to be like, and now for the dark side.
Okay, now for the dark side.
Oh, yeah.
Those things aren't going anywhere. Those things really exist, that it's not reality that we can shut down and not have anything happen. That's living somewhere inside of you. And it causes illness. It causes all sorts of like stress responses in our bodies. What starts to happen is that your body starts shutting down the systems it doesn't need. If you stay in fight or flight all of the time, if you stay in this high, everything's going to fall apart sort of state all of the time, your body's also living in that state, and we're not meant to stay in a sustained state of fight or flight. So fight or flight is very much like present. It is, there's a threat in front of me, I need to run from it, or I need to fight it, or I need to freeze, which is the worst case sort of scenario. It's going to kill me, at least. Well, we can get into that later, but at least this will make it hurt less, is what that response is for. They are all in the moment. I'm dealing with a life-threatening issue. But we stay in fight or flight when we have that sort of anxiety. And so our body does what it's meant to do in that, which is to shut down all extra functions, which is digestion. So a lot of gut issues, hair loss accompanies that. Libido accompanies that. All of the things that don't involve like literally running and fighting start to get shut down because your body's like, I'm still facing this threat and we're not able to deal with it. And so, yeah, it has a huge impact on your body. It can cause all sorts of things. And then the other side of that is really deep depression, is that you're so detached and so pulled away from your life that life starts to lose all joy. You can't plug into it. And that's where that real sense of hopelessness, and that's of course a very dangerous, potentially deadly place to be.
So what I'm hearing is that the very thing that's keeping us from wanting to open up is the thing that's hurting us.
Yeah.
So I'm cool, I'm going to be an easy client is really saying, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to articulate that.
Yeah, I don't feel allowed to articulate that. It doesn't feel safe to articulate that. Or I literally have never had modeled for me a way to articulate that.
So what do you do when you have a client who's kind of giving you that sort of message in session? You know, they're just being easy, they're being cool, they're sitting on the front porch of their messy house, and they're like, it's not even that messy, and I like living in a mess.
I feel so silly that I even called you out here, because it's like not even a big deal.
Right. So what's your response to that? How do you help a client who's dealing with that?
So it really depends on the client. It can be very, unique client to client, but for the ones who can't even talk about it, who are really at that headline surface level thing, a lot of the times I'm still going to be in the space of rapport building, that I can't rush the process of you feeling safe in counseling. And there will usually be some sort of moment that feels like a breakthrough where you set a little bit of information forward and you're like, okay, how are you going to react to this? And then I get to react like a therapist, which is validating those things and working through those things and telling you how okay it is that you feel that tiny little bit of a feeling that you told me that you might have felt about something that one time.
Yeah.
And then maybe the next time you put a little bit more forward. And so we're able to ease into it that way. With the clients who are able to say up front, don't worry, I'm going to be easy, then I'm getting to address that more directly. And not only are we talking through how it is not your job to be easy, but also, why do you feel you need to tell me that? Why do you feel like you need to assure me that you're going to be easy? And that's going to lead us, hopefully pretty directly, more into topics around how you've had to do that before. And now we're getting to talk about how not okay that was, and how harmful it is to a child to not be able to handle their big emotions, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe we're flipping it and we're imagining a little kid having that response in front of us, and that they're not a bad kid for having that response, and how valid they are in feeling upset about this very upsetting thing, and getting to kind of turn around and show that same sort of attention. And now when we're zooming out and looking at our own childhood, it's like, oh, okay, it wasn't me. And that's something that we do, that as a kid, we're wired to assume that we're the issue, which makes sense when things are good. That, okay, for a really simple kind of silly response, if we're practicing something, we're learning math, we're learning a subject, and you're like, what's 2 + 2? And you're like, 5? I'm like, what's 2 + 2? And now you take another guess. You're guessing that something went wrong. My parents having this reaction I wasn't expecting because something went wrong, so I can correct it, and now I'm learning. Well, that's great when things are happy and healthy. But when you...
What does 2 plus...
I don't know.
I'm glued to my freaking seat over here.
Should we post it in the copy or something after to say what it is? I feel like we should Google it.
I feel like this joke's already run its course.
Okay, enough with that.
All right.
It's great that we think that something about us should change when things are happy and healthy. It's how we're learning to adapt and fit into our environment. But when something's not happy and healthy, we're still wired to think that we're the issue. And also, it's not safe to think that our caretaker can't actually take good care of us. It's not safe to think that our caretaker is responding inappropriately to us. We need them. And so
mom's yelling at me. Maybe if I saw this objectively, I would understand that mom is abusively yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
But my immediate thought as a child is that this is my fault.
Yeah.
I deserve this.
Yeah.
And mom is a good mom.
Mm-hmm.
And
mom is a good mom who wants to take good care of me, who's making good decisions. So I can trust her because I have to keep trusting her. I have to live here. I'm the one who's bad. I'm the one who's wrong. Something about me has to change and be different.
And so you're taking a client on this journey that goes to freaking Christmas past.
Yeah.
To say in that moment your response was acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you were having a difficult time dealing with that as a child is acceptable. Yep. And that helps an adult unravel some of the problems that have kind of haunted them throughout their entire lives.
Yeah, that we can dig into why you had the response the way that you did, and why, of course, that's perfectly natural and normal for a kid to respond that way, and what that thing meant to you, because you're a kid without the autonomy of an adult, without the knowledge of how the world works. If you get lost in the grocery store, like I think we talked about in the trauma episode, that can be traumatizing. As an adult, you're like, I got my keys, I'm going home, doesn't matter. As a kid, your one connection to food and resources and a roof over your head has disappeared, and they're probably never coming back again. Of course that's traumatizing. Of course it's okay that you screamed and cried and had the response that you did. And that's why it wasn't fair that your parent shut you down when that happened, told you not to make a scene. And now how many times in your life has that happened? Has that same thing happened to you? Have you felt like something was the end of the world because at the time it was, even if we can look back and go, it wasn't even a big deal. At the time it was. And how can we now validate that it's okay that you felt that way and it wasn't fair, you didn't get to have the response you needed to have. And that response had to live somewhere, and instead it lived in you being shut down and having to check out of your own life.
Damn, this is getting kind of heavy.
So it's normal that you're in counseling and you don't know how to do that. You've been very carefully taught not to do that in 100 ways. Maybe you had a parent who wasn't the parent that they needed to be, but also maybe that one time in 8th grade, you cried on the bus and everybody made fun of you, and you resolved after that, crying in public's never okay. I can't cry around people, and it overgeneralized to the rest of your life that crying causes issues for people, and it causes issues for me, and I'm more likable and I'm more valuable if I'm somebody who doesn't cry. So it doesn't have to be that you had this whole, difficult experience all throughout your childhood. Maybe it was just the one time. Maybe you cried with a significant other for the first time and they didn't have the response you needed. And you went, well,
not doing that again.
Exactly. And instead of going, this one person is not responding appropriately, it has to do with them, we go, it has to do with me, just like we do when we're kids.
It's funny that this is what we're talking about, because I am very much in the middle of dealing with this issue that is kind of the same thing, where I was raised in an environment where I wasn't good enough for one of my parents, and it was, some could have viewed that as I'm going to spur you on to be better, but there was no end to... There was never it was never enough. No matter what I did or how much effort I put in or how much success I found, I always fell short of the mark. And that has haunted me my entire life. And this idea that I always should be able and am able to do more. And this, I'm dealing with this right now. Yeah,
that turns into the belief that my value is something that I have to, it's by the things that I achieve. It's by the things that I accomplish and put forward for other people, and that my value for existing is not enough.
And I demonstrate to myself that I deserve to be here by getting things done. And my therapist said, you don't have to achieve things to be of value.
Yeah.
And I frankly still don't quite understand what that means, because if you're not achieving anything, then you are of no value, right? I'm still thick in this one. I am lost in the sauce on this one.
No, it's good. And we all are in some degree in whatever. If you've dealt with everything, now the next thing is going to come up, because we're just constantly untangling the things that have impacted us. And even if you've gotten rid of the big ones, now the small ones feel big because they're the ones that are bothering you. But yeah, it's that's exactly what happens with clients, is that you have this belief. And now everything in your life confirms that to you, that you are only paying attention when people like what you accomplish. And when people tell you Price, I just like that you exist, in one ear and out the other, because that's not the thing that's keeping me safe. That's not the thing that's keeping me going. It's not a valuable belief to me. Because what I really believe is that if I stopped achieving things, that your feeling would go away.
Why is it that the things we're taught as kids are so hard to get over when they're, and it doesn't even have to be malicious, but when you're taught something as a kid that is harmful in some way, why is it so challenging for us to get through that as an adult?
I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's the period in our life where we're learning how the world works for the first time. And so everything is setting the stage for, this is true in all cases forever and ever.
2 + 2 is 4.
Every time, forever, for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so because we're setting the way that the world works in so many ways, when those things are part of it, that's also impacting the way that we view the rest of the world. The other thing that's happening is that we're so vulnerable as kids, that out of all the animal species, we're the one that stays reliant on our parent by far and away for the longest time. There is just such a long period of time where we cannot make it on our own. And so that puts us in a very vulnerable position for a long period of time, which makes those survival sorts of lessons stick in longer. And then the last thing that comes to mind is just that we don't have context. Then we haven't had all of the time to have these experiences. As an adult, it's a lot easier to go, I'm sorry, you don't get to yell at me, because we know what it's like to have somebody not yell at us. We know that this could have been accomplished a different way.
Right.
And here you are doing this. This is the unusual thing. This is outside my realm of experience. But as a kid, we don't have context. So many things are the first time we're experiencing it. And our parents so directly create our little world and environment. And we believe that everything within that's normal.
Man, I got so sick of talking about my parents in therapy that I was like, I am done. I announced, you'll remember, I'm sure you remember. I announced, I was like, again, Michael Scott in the office, I declare bankruptcy. Like, I am done talking about my parents. I am much more complicated than that. I'm an adult with adult issues. Turns out, nope.
I feel like by the end of that session, you had a breakthrough about something with a parent.
It was almost immediate. It was very challenging to my pride to get hit with that.
But here's the thing to keep in mind, because that's another reason I think clients will have a hard time being vulnerable, because even if they do have the awareness that they're not telling the full story, even if maybe they do have the language to say, here's what's really going on, it can feel exhausting. It's like, I am sick of it always being this other thing. I'm ready to move forward. Know that I'm not bothered by that as your therapist. I'm not the same thing again, because clients really do worry about that. They're like, I feel like I've just been talking about this breakup for, 5 weeks straight. That's okay. I'm not here to be entertained. If it's still bothering you, it's still a thing. And the same thing is true with parent stuff. We can talk about it every single time, and that's okay. And also know that this is the one space you're probably getting to really process through these things. That of course in the rest of your life, it's normal to be able to say, oh, I was stuck in traffic and it makes me so angry. And everybody else is like, oh yeah, me too. I hate that. A lot harder in a public space to be like, man, my dad really crushed my sense of self-worth.
All right.
Okay, well, this is a business meeting, so if we could move on.
Yeah, I just met you. This is a Tinder date.
Yeah, please stop. This is probably the one space in your life you're getting to do that. It's okay that we keep coming back to the same types of things. I know that might feel exhausting. The other thing I'm paying attention to as a therapist in that space is if we're having exactly the same conversation again and again, it's my job to recognize that you're not getting something you need from that conversation. So talking about your parents every time is one thing. Let's do that every week. Talking about the same moment in time again and again and again is my cue, not your cue. You're just here to be in therapy. That's fine. Is my cue to go, something about the way that we're dealing with this isn't right. I'm missing something here. Because you should feel like you're getting to make progress forward in those moments.
So what are some signs to you that we're starting to break apart we're starting to peel back this onion a little bit?
Yeah.
That we were really struggling with getting in there, whether it was purposeful or not. I'm going to be an easy client or whatever the reason may be. How do you kind of tell that you're starting to get in there a little bit?
Yeah. Oftentimes in therapy, things feel worse before they feel better, not because things are actually literally getting worse, but because we have more conscious awareness of, oh my God, I have so many feelings. Oh, I do feel so many ways. I was so impacted by that.
I am a messy bitch.
And I am a messy bitch. And that's great. We love a messy bitch. But those things are starting to come to the surface. That's a big one. You are starting to have more feelings about things. Instead of just hearing the cover story, I'm hearing for the first time that something made you angry. Wow, you never got to feel angry as a kid. This is a huge deal that you're feeling angry about something. This is so good. Let's really lean into that feeling of anger. And so I'm starting to hear more of those things come up. At some point, they're starting to then move through what can feel like the more difficult bit and get into, okay, things in my life are starting to come untangled now. I got to have a conversation, and for the first time I really advocated for myself because I felt like I deserved that I knew that could create feelings in the other person, and I did it anyway, and it made our relationship better, or it showed me it's not a good relationship for me to be in, and now I got to recognize that. Either one of those things are really good bits of information to have.
People either like you or don't like you. Your efforts to people please are not doing you any favors. That is a difficult one to really learn.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Oh, something that people pleasers might not like to hear is that it's a form of manipulation. that we're trying to trick the people in our lives into liking some fake version of us. Well, that's a lie.
I'm great. No. I'm great.
And I don't say that to like upset or frustrate you so much as I know that's not a people pleaser's intention. That they're trying to be easy, they're trying to be good, they're trying to be valuable.
But you're presenting yourself in a way that's you feel is more appealing to the person you're presenting yourself to. It is inherently misleading.
It's not your job to manipulate people into liking you, and you are never going to get to enjoy the benefit of that because you will always just be worried that they'll discover the real you.
Yeah.
That made me completely lose my train of thought.
Well, what I was asking was how do you know that you're really getting in there?
Yes.
And I guess at this point it's like, what does healing look like in a therapeutic space?
Okay, so one of my best moments ever in therapy, well, two different moments. One was a client who started telling me that and this will just happen across therapy. This has happened a lot, is that their inner voice, which was the voice of their critical parent, was starting to be replaced with a different voice. That inner voice was starting to sound a lot different. And that even though the same things were happening to them in life and things could still be difficult, that inner critic, that was a parent's voice telling them that they weren't good enough, was starting to change and to soften. And that, again, the same experiences are happening in life, but they're starting to have this awareness and a different perspective on it. So that's something to look forward to. Another thing is a client telling me that their sense of like smell had gotten better. That that colors seemed brighter. Well, they're coming out of depression. Like their emotions had been so depressed. Their senses had been so depressed. They had been so detached from their life, and it felt like the world was coming alive again. And that's, something that we get to hear again and again, that like, wow, I didn't even know the world felt like this. I didn't even know life could have these moments in it because they were so pulled away from it. So real concrete bits of something is changing here and getting better. And then just noticing that like, there's a relief. There's so much resentment in having to carefully manage every single relationship you're in and having to really carefully paint this picture of who you are and how you want people to see you. And the relief of not having to do that anymore is huge. I feel like exhaustion starts slipping away. And that, again, resentment toward everybody who you've been trying so hard to convince to like you, but you never feel that way because it's not really you.
Right.
That those things really start to change. Another thing is just more emotions coming out in therapy. Clients who haven't gotten the space to cry before, getting to cry. I know people joke about on social media, like my therapist is waiting for me to cry. No, but I know that we're not getting into it if you're not having real emotions about the things that we're talking about. Those things should be coming up.
What about folks who say, of which I was one of them up until recently, in the recent years, I just don't cry. That's just not something that I do. I'm fine. Yeah. Everything's fucking fine.
Everything's great.
But I'm not a crier. What do you say to those folks?
Humans cry. It is one of the many things we do. Crying is very, very important to us. It releases all sorts of chemicals depending on the sort of cry that we're having. Happy tears look chemically different than sad tears, than angry tears, and that our body is meant to be doing those things. You are not the exception to the human rule. We're meant to have those experiences, and so probably something's getting in your way from crying. Now, if you're a client in my office for the first time telling me you're just not a crier, like, okay, that's great. Tell me about what you are. Like, let's focus on something else. I'm not going to force you into a position where you feel like you're you have to do that.
Well, when I said I wasn't a crier, it was because it was literally true. I was not a crier. I did not cry. That was not something that happened.
We have both become criers in the past couple of years.
We're little soy boys. We are little. Oh my goodness. I used to be such a man, and now I am just a blubbering little sack of shit. But I'm much happier.
And weirdly also much more sad and much more angry and much more joyful and find life much more hysterical.
Yeah.
Feeling all the things.
Yeah, life is much better.
But those things, that's like coming in and saying I'm going to be an easy client. Like I never cry. Even they're saying that seriously. They're not like, really, I am crying. The clients who come in and they're like, I have not cried in 8 years. Like, ooh, what else have you not felt for 8 years?
Wow. Yeah. I think it's so interesting how crying and laughing kind of come from the same place.
Yeah, we've been talking about that a little bit recently. Tell me about that.
Wait, what the fuck? I thought I was interviewing you. You Uno reverse card me.
I did.
Okay. So when you're laughing hysterically, you start crying. Mm-hmm. You produce tears. You laugh so hard you cry. Like that's a truth. Like that's a known thing. Also, like the convulsions of laughing really hard are exactly the same as sobbing. Mm-hmm. And it's coming from like, it feels like so far on two ends of the same spectrum that they've looped back around and they're at the same place, like physically, you know. But the big difference is that one of those is great to do when you're watching a comedy, stand up, or, you know, when you're laughing with your friends, and the other one is not so great to do. Like one of those we celebrate doing in public spaces. The other one is like not okay.
That's what I was going to say, is that the only difference between the two is that we've labeled one of those socially acceptable and another one not socially acceptable. They are both things that our bodies need to do. They're both this huge release of like energy. It is good for us to like shake our bodies and to move and to have full body sorts of emotional experiences. But we have said, you can laugh in public. You cannot cry like that in public, if at all. But the fact of the matter is that like our bodies are meant to be shaking and to be moving and to be feeling sensations, and that laughing and crying aren't that different because they aren't that different. They're really strong emotions. And like I said, it's not just that you can't press down on one set of emotions without pressing down on the other because they're all emotions. They're all also so intertwined that like there's something about grief that can be so funny too. There's something about and that's something I find with a lot of my like grieving clients is that we are laughing and crying back to back.
It's quite possible to be kind of be doing both at the same time.
Yeah, you can move back and forth between both of those things pretty easily. They're both a similar like exertion of emotional energy.
I saw a TikTok that was reposted on YouTube because I'm a millennial, and it was a girl who was opening up in a college acceptance letter, and she was with two of her friends who had already been accepted to that college, and oh my god, if you want to cringe like so hard, this is a great video. Yeah. She opens the letter and she has not been accepted to the school, and her friends burst out laughing hysterically. She starts laughing hysterically. And you're wondering, is she laughing or crying? And pretty quickly, because it morphs into sobbing, but it's the same, like physically it's the same thing. The only thing that changes is the expression on her face. But she's doing the same thing. And man, if you're a masochist, you can go look that up. And also it makes me think that I am like really glad that sort of shit was not filmed for me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
The fact that got posted on the internet, if she did that, if she made that decision, hats off. That was like some vulnerability being displayed. But
isn't that such a true human experience?
Yeah.
Like we're not used to watching that because again, what's acceptable to post on the internet is somebody laughing, is something that's funny. It's not acceptable to be crying, but it's only because we've labeled it that way. It's only because we've said grief is something that you do in private, which is so weird because grief is actually something that demands a witness. Like our grief needs to be witnessed by other people. It's so good that she got to be, I mean, I don't know how they handled it after, but so good she got to be in the room with her friends and cry. And I hope that like they were able to comfort her in that. I hope that that wasn't shut down. But we absolutely need people in our grief, and we're at our healthiest when like a community is able to grieve together. That's why we like have things like funerals, and why clients who didn't get to have funerals for their loved ones during COVID really struggled with their grief for a long time in a different way. And we saw that all across the world, that grief felt very different because it was so isolated at the time. But like, yeah, those things are similar, and it's unfair that we've labeled one okay and one not, because they're both good. They're both good for us.
So with a few minutes left, I just want to ask you, do you ever feel that a client, because we talked about like a client lying or being dishonest, but really in the context of like, are they holding anything back? Are they being vulnerable and open and really willing to go there?
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like clients are outright lying to you? What does that mean?
A couple of things. There are certainly some spaces that are like life or death scenarios where it's important that clients are honest. For instance, Ashley, who works in eating disorders, there's a lot of lying around protecting eating disorder behavior. And that's deadly because we're in a lethal space right now. We're trying to save somebody's life, and it's important to know what's really going on.
Right.
But that's really on the extreme. In general, we were like taught in school how to deal with our feelings if a client's lying to us. So I went into counseling like, clients are going to lie and I'm going to need to catch that. And it's not my job to be a detective. I really don't have the feeling that clients are lying to me. A couple of things I think can happen. A lot of times when I hear counselors thinking that somebody has lied to them, it's somebody talking about an area around trauma. And that is just valuable information that it is really important that we come to trauma with a lot of acceptance and belief. We can deal with untangling the details of something later, but the way that trauma is stored is just so different. And those details are valuable whether or not they match up with an observer's opinion of reality. That like the way that that happened for you is the way that that happened. It's the way that it's been encoded in your brain. It's the thing that's impacting you.
Yeah, what you experienced, regardless if it was what somebody else witnessed, is what is relevant when you're talking about like moving past that for that individual, right?
Yeah, that it is not my job to go, okay, that couldn't have happened that way. It sounds like what you pulled away from that event is that exact experience. That's the one that we're dealing with. It doesn't really matter. Because your perception of that is valid and that's what's living with you. Maybe you get to the other side of it and have a different belief about what happened. Maybe you don't. And at the end of the day, it's really not relevant. It's not my job to be a detective. Thank goodness that's not the space I want to work in. Like that thing that happened is valid and that's what matters in the room. And the other thing is like, am I creating an environment that makes people feel like they need to lie? So something that we talk about with like kids is that like if you set up a scenario that a kid feels like they have to lie in, don't be surprised when they then lie. If you're like, did you eat the cookie that was on the counter? We know there's a right and a wrong answer to that, right? Mom is angry. She's asking if I ate the cookie. My goal at the end of this scenario is for mom not to be mad at me and to love me again. No, I didn't eat the cookie. Your kid's going to lie to you. And if I'm setting up a space in therapy where a client feels like they need to be dishonest and that's becoming evident, where have they felt that before? Why are they feeling that now? What am I doing to contribute to that? Or what are they reliving in this experience? But in general, again, I was kind of taught that that was going to be an issue. And I don't find that clients are lying. I really believe that people come to therapy wanting to heal, wanting to be better. And if something comes out and it's not fully true, it's either part of their very valid perception of what's happened to them, or there's another reason getting in the way. But it's not valuable for me to try to pick through and, make sure that every single thing is the one true version of events, because that doesn't really exist.
It's more valuable for you to accept and to move forward with that acceptance. And
Yeah.
I think that you'll find people arriving at reality on their own
Yeah.
if they feel like they're safe and heard, right?
Yes. That's the other thing, is where I really came to worry about that happening is when clients are in relationships and they're talking about, here's what happened, here's what my partner said. Am I validating something that isn't exactly true?
Right.
That starts to become evident because they go back to their partner and the things that we're talking about aren't working. And they're coming to that conclusion on their own. They're starting to have those realizations. I didn't need to tell them, like, that's not true. That's not what happened. I wasn't there. I don't know. And we'll see if the way that we're perceiving things is helpful, or if now we're needing to do a reframe and shift to have a different thought. Maybe your partner wasn't intentionally trying to piss you off. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe they were having a separate thought. Again, the lying bit isn't really important anymore because we all believe untrue things and say untrue things. And
So we're about out of time. What's one way that we could be more honest with our therapist in our next session?
yeah. One is telling your therapist that you're struggling to be honest. That's going to go a long way just in like letting them in on what's going on with you. And now we can explore why that's happening.
Wow.
So that's a big one, is just saying it in the first place. And what a way to be vulnerable. What a way to take that first step. The other one is to know that it's not valuable for you to try to be the perfect client. It's not overwhelming to us as therapists. When life is messy, life is messy. That's okay. And then another thing that can be helpful just to capture what's going on in the moment, just like a practice to implement, is writing things down when they happen, when you're actually feeling the feeling. That's going to help you to not have a cover story later. Write it down, and if when you look back at it, you're a little bit embarrassed, you're probably on the right track. If you're like, ooh, that was a lot of drama right there, that's probably exactly what was true for you in the moment. That's exactly what I want to hear in counseling.
Well, I am grateful that we get a chance to talk about a lot, it feels like
today.
But
yeah.
really at the core, that being honest and open and vulnerable with a therapist is the way to get the most out of your therapy sessions.
Yeah, to make the most of your time, for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of time, thank you for yours.
Thank you for your time.
And we'll see you next time on I Married Your Therapist.
If you want to find me on Instagram,
Oh, fuck. I always forget.
you can find me at therapywith_Ash on Instagram.
Yep. And I'm going to work on remembering that in the outro.
Yeah. And we have a podcast Instagram page as well called I Married Your Therapist. So
Yeah, we're
that's
doing
easy
that
to
now.
find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good time.
All right.
Ooh.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.